Imagine holding the fate of your worst enemy in your hands, and all you have to do is sign a piece of paper. Most people would scream or run away, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the application on my desk, feeling a cold calm wash over me. My world was built on lines, grids, and perfectly balanced ledgers. Chaos was something I left behind decades ago. Before we continue, if you love our stories, do well to encourage us by hitting the like button, share, and subscribe for more. My name is Vincent Lane. I am 32 years old, a self-made real estate investor, and a man who values silence more than gold. My apartment complex, The Haven, was my masterpiece. It wasn't just a building. It was a well-oiled machine where every tenant followed the rules, the lawns were manicured to the millimeter, and peace was mandatory. I sat in my office, the air conditioner humming a steady rhythm, aligning the edges of a stack of papers until they were flush against the desk. I had spent 10 years building a fortress of solitude and success, insulating myself from the messy, unpredictable nature of the world. I was the master of my domain, and I ensured that nothing ever disrupted the perfect order I had cultivated, until I flipped the page of the folder in front of me. I was sifting through the pile of potential tenants for Unit 5C, the corner unit with the best natural light. Most were standard applicants, young professionals, quiet couples, people who fit the mold of a perfect tenant. Then I flipped to the third folder. The name jumped off the page like a slap in the face, Brock Halloway. My breath hitched in my throat, and my hand froze in midair. Suddenly, I wasn't sitting in my comfortable leather chair anymore. I was 15 years old, pressed hard against a cold metal locker, smelling stale sweat and cheap body spray. I could hear his laugh, that barking, cruel laugh that used to haunt my dreams every single night. Brock Halloway, the guy who made high school a daily survival horror game. He was the reason I ate lunch in the library. He was the reason I learned to walk silently, so I wouldn't be noticed. The trauma was real, sharp, and immediate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal reaction to a predator. But I wasn't that scared little kid anymore. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and forced my pulse to slow down. I looked at the photo attached to the application. It was definitely him. My finger hovered over the reject stamp. It would have been so easy. I could deny him housing with a single motion, and he would never know it was me. He would just be another faceless rejection in a competitive market. But then I paused. I pulled my hand back. Denying him was too simple. It was too quick. It offered no closure for the years of torment he had put me through. I looked closer at his application. His credit report was shaky, hovering right on the line of acceptable. His employment history was sporadic, jumping from sales job to sales job. He needed this apartment. If I rejected him, he would just go bully someone else in a different building. But if I accepted him, I would be his landlord. I would be the authority figure. The power dynamic would shift entirely. I realized that accepting him and holding him to the highest, most impossible standard was the ultimate test. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. I picked up my pen, the expensive one with the heavy weight, and circled the word approved. I decided to let the wolf into the fold, but he had no idea he was walking into a cage. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened a blank document on my computer and pulled up my standard lease agreement. It was usually a straightforward 12 pages. By the time the sun rose, it was 40 pages long. I wasn't writing a lease. I was building a legal labyrinth. I tightened every single loophole. I added specific clauses that I knew a guy like Brock would struggle with. I drafted Section 8, Paragraph C. Absolute prohibition of noise above 50 decibels after 9 p.m., enforced by digital monitoring. I added Section 12, Subsection D. Strict regulations on guest parking, requiring a permit for anyone staying longer than 4 hours. I included clauses about aesthetic changes, forbidding even the use of nails in the walls without written consent. I added heavy fines for improper trash separation and mandated professional carpet cleaning every 6 months. This document was my weapon for the surgical takedown. It was entirely legal, completely binding, and utterly suffocating for anyone who didn't respect rules. I printed it out on crisp, heavy paper. It looked professional, but to me, it looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. I was ready for him. The next afternoon, Brock arrived to see the place. I watched him from the leasing office window. He pulled up in a rusted, lifted truck that sounded like it was dying, the muffler roaring and sputtering. He stepped out, and he looked exactly the same, just heavier and redder in the face. He was wearing sunglasses even though it was an overcast day, and he was loudly talking on his phone, oblivious to the world. He walked right past me, not even making eye contact. "Yeah, I'm at the place now," he shouted into the phone, snapping his gum loudly. He looked at me like I was the help, or a piece of furniture. "You the landlord?" he asked, finally hanging up but keeping the phone in his hand. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't ask my name. He just looked past me, chewing that gum with his mouth open. The most incredible part was that he did not recognize me. To him, I was so insignificant in high school that he had completely erased my face from his memory. This highlighted his callous, arrogant nature perfectly. He had no idea who I was, which meant he had no idea what was coming. We sat down at the small glass table in the leasing office to make it official. I placed the 40-page document in front of him. It was thick, heavy, and intimidating, or at least it should have been. I cleared my throat, ready to do my due diligence. "Mr. Halloway," I began, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I need to walk you through a few key clauses. This building has very specific rules regarding." He cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand, not even looking up from his phone. Yeah, standard stuff. Don't burn the place down. Pay rent on the first." I got it. He grabbed the pen from my hand, his grip greasy and careless. He didn't read a single word. He didn't look at the fine schedule. He didn't see the clause about quiet hours or the restrictions on guests. He just flipped to the back page and scribbled his signature. "You're a real uptight guy, aren't you?" he muttered, tossing the pen back onto the desk. "Relax a little." I picked up the document slowly. The ink was still wet. "I just like to be thorough," I said softly. He had just signed his own warrant, and he was too arrogant to even notice the trap springing shut. Move-in day was a disaster, exactly as I had predicted. It was a Saturday morning, and the peace of the haven was shattered by the grinding sound of gears. Brock had decided to bypass the designated loading zone entirely. Instead, he backed his massive rental truck right over the curb and onto the pristine, manicured lawn in front of the building. I watched from my second-floor window, my heart rate steady, my phone in hand. I zoomed in and took a photo. The tire tracks were deep, tearing up the sod I had paid a landscaper to install just last month. That was strike one. A moment later, I watched him wrestle a beige sofa out of the truck. He was careless, dragging it through the main lobby. Scrape. I heard the sound of wood hitting plaster. He gouged a 3-inch line into the freshly painted hallway wall. He didn't stop to check it. He just laughed with his buddy and kept moving. I noted the time, 10:14 a.m. I opened my ledger and turned to the section marked violations. I wrote down the details calmly. Section 4, paragraph B. Damage to landscaping and common areas. He had been a tenant for less than an hour, and he was already racking up penalties. Most landlords would have run downstairs to yell at him. They would have waved their arms and demanded he move the truck. That was what Brock expected. He thrived on confrontation because he knew he could physically intimidate people. But I wasn't going to play his game. I was going to play mine. I sat at my computer and drafted a formal document. Notice of lease violation, unauthorized parking and property damage. I kept the language polite, cold, and professional. I cited the specific page numbers he had ignored. I printed it on official cream-colored letterhead and placed it in a crisp envelope. Later that evening, after he had finished moving his boxes, I walked silently down the hall and slid the envelope under his door. I stood there for a moment, listening. I heard footsteps, then the rustle of paper. "What is this?" I heard him mumble. Then came that familiar, barking laugh. "Unbelievable," he scoffed. I heard the distinct sound of paper being crumbled into a ball. He threw it in the trash. He thought it was a joke. He thought I was weak because I used paper instead of shouting. He had absolutely no idea that every single piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was building around him. A week went by, and the tension in the building was palpable. Then came Friday night. I was reading in my living room when the floor began to vibrate. It started as a low thrumming, then grew into a rhythmic pounding. Bass. Heavy, distorted bass. I checked the clock. It was 11:15 p.m. The lease clearly stated that quiet hours began strictly at 10 p.m. Brock was throwing a housewarming party, and he obviously didn't care about the neighbors. I put my book down. I didn't get angry. I didn't march down there in my pajamas to bang on his door and beg for silence. That is what a victim does. Instead, I picked up a professional-grade decibel meter I had purchased specifically for this moment. I walked into the hallway, standing 10 feet from his door. The music was blasting through the wood. The meter spiked, 85 decibels, 90 decibels. I took a video on my phone, capturing the reading on the meter and the time on my watch. I recorded for a full minute, documenting the consistent violation of Section 8, Paragraph C. The evidence was undeniable. I walked back to my apartment, the bass still thumping, and sat down to draft the invoice. The next morning, the silence had returned, but the storm was just beginning. At 9 a.m. sharp, my automated system sent an email to Brock. Subject: Lease violation penalty, incident number 002. The email detailed the noise violation, attached the video proof, and notified him that a $250 fine had been automatically deducted from his security deposit. 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a heavy, angry pounding. I opened the door calmly. Brock was standing there, looking hungover and furious, his phone in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, shoving the phone screen in my face. "You stole $200 from me." I didn't step back. I stood my ground, my expression blank. "I didn't steal anything, Mr. Halloway," I said smoothly. "If you refer to Section 8, Paragraph C of the lease you signed, you agreed to an automatic deduction for noise violations recorded above 50 decibels. I pointed to the signature on the digital copy. "That is your signature, isn't it?" He sputtered, his face turning red. He wanted to hit something, but he couldn't argue with his own handwriting. He turned and stomped away, muttering curses. He was confused. He was used to fights, not contracts. Before I tell you how I executed the next phase of the surgical takedown and turned Brock's own carelessness into a legal trap, I have to ask, if you have come with us this far, it means you are really invested in Vincent's journey for justice. Please do well to like this video, share it with friends who love satisfying underdog stories, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a part. Also, tell us in the comments where you are listening from. We love seeing our global community. Thank you. The war of attrition continued, and the battlefield moved to the parking lot. The Haven had strictly assigned parking spots, clearly marked with white paint and unit numbers. One Wednesday evening, Brock came home late. I watched from my window as his truck roared into the lot. Instead of maneuvering into his designated spot, he parked diagonally across 2 spaces, with his rear bumper completely blocking the wheelchair ramp for the building. He jumped out, pulled his jacket over his head to shield himself from the rain, and ran inside. He probably thought, "It's raining, no one will care." He was wrong. I cared. I picked up my phone and dialed the towing company that I had a contract with. "Yes, I have a vehicle blocking a handicap access point. Immediate removal." 20 minutes later, the flashing lights of the tow truck illuminated the wet pavement. I watched silently as they hooked up his massive truck and dragged it away. When Brock came out the next morning, coffee in hand, he froze. He walked in circles, looking for his truck, thinking it was stolen. When he saw the no parking sign with the tow company's number, he kicked the sign so hard he nearly fell over. I simply noted the damage to the sign in my ledger. By now, Brock was angry, but he was also starting to get sloppy. He was so focused on the big things that he forgot the small details, and that is where I caught him next. Our city had very strict recycling laws, and my lease passed those fines directly to the tenants. One afternoon, I walked by the communal dumpster area. The blue recycling bin, meant only for paper and cardboard, was overflowing with greasy pizza boxes and glass beer bottles. I didn't sigh. I didn't complain. I put on a pair of thick rubber gloves and went to work. I pulled out the bag of trash he had thrown in the wrong bin. I opened it and sifted through the mess until I found exactly what I needed. A piece of junk mail with Brock Halloway, Unit 5C printed clearly on the label. I took a high-resolution photo of the mail next to the glass bottles in the paper bin. I documented the date and time. An hour later, Brock received another notification. Improper waste disposal fine, $150. I saw him later that day by the mailboxes. He was staring at his phone, his face pale. He looked up at the security camera in the corner and shivered. He was starting to feel the eyes on him. The pressure was mounting, but Brock still hadn't learned that rules are not suggestions. 2 weeks later, he brought a girlfriend home. I didn't mind tenants having guests. It was normal. But the lease was explicit. No guest may remain on the premises for more than 3 consecutive nights without prior written approval. It was a standard clause to prevent unauthorized tenants from moving in. She stayed Monday night, then Tuesday, then Wednesday. On Thursday morning, I saw her car still parked in the visitor lot. She hadn't left. Brock was testing the boundaries again, betting on my indifference. He lost the bet. I drafted a formal notice of unauthorized occupancy. I didn't fine him this time. Instead, I sent a warning that failure to rectify the situation would result in a lease violation that could lead to eviction proceedings. When he got the letter, he didn't storm down to my office. He didn't yell. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. He realized that I wasn't just a landlord collecting rent. I was an omnipresent force. I knew who was in his apartment and for how long. The walls were closing in, and he had nowhere to hide. After the guest incident, the atmosphere in the building shifted. The callous and arrogant bully was beginning to crack. Paranoia had set in. I would see him in the hallway, and the change was remarkable. He used to stomp around like he owned the place, slamming doors and shouting on his phone. Now he tiptoed. He closed his door with 2 hands to ensure it didn't make a sound. He was terrified of making a mistake. He knew I was watching, and he knew I had the lease memorized better than he knew his own family. But here is the thing about people like Brock. They can't fake discipline forever. He wasn't wired to be careful. The stress of trying to be perfect was eating him alive. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes. He started parking his rental car perfectly centered, checking it 3 times before going inside. He was trying to live in a museum, but he was a bull. It was only a matter of time before he knocked something over. I could see the frustration building behind his eyes. He wanted to explode, to lash out, but he knew that one wrong move would cost him money he didn't have. He was trapped in a prison of his own making. The 3-month mark arrived, which meant it was time for the quarterly inspection. I had scheduled it weeks in advance, giving him the required 24-hour notice. I stood outside his door at 10 a.m. sharp, wearing my best suit and holding a clipboard with a red pen. I knocked 3 times firmly. Brock opened the door. He looked exhausted. The apartment smelled like bleach. He had obviously spent all night cleaning, trying to hide any evidence of his chaotic lifestyle. "Come in," he mumbled, stepping aside. I walked in slowly. I didn't say a word. I ran a finger along the top of the door frame. Dust. I made a note. I walked into the kitchen and checked the faucet. It dripped once. "Leaking fixture unreported," I said aloud, writing it down. I checked the carpet in the living room and found a small, dark stain near the corner. "Permanent damage to flooring," I noted. Brock was sweating, following me around like a puppy. "I can fix that," he stammered. "I'll get a cleaner." I didn't look at him. "The lease requires immediate reporting of maintenance issues, Mr. Halloway. Negligence is a violation." I clicked my pen shut. I had everything I needed. The inspection wasn't about the stain. It was about showing him that he was failing. The pressure finally became too much. 2 days after the inspection, I was walking down the hallway carrying my briefcase. I turned the corner, and there he was. Brock was waiting for me. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and he looked like he had been pacing for an hour. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the stairs. He loomed over me, puffing out his chest, trying to use his height to scare me just like he did in 10th grade. "You have a problem with me, man?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. Spittle flew from his mouth. "You're picking on me. You're trying to ruin my life with these fines." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The air smelled of stale beer and aggression. This was the moment I had anticipated. The callous antagonist had run out of patience and was reverting to his only skill, brute force. He thought I would cower. He thought I would apologize and waive the fees just to make him stop yelling. But I wasn't the scrawny kid with the heavy backpack anymore. I adjusted my glasses and looked him dead in the eye, my pulse perfectly steady. "I don't have a problem, Brock," I said calmly. "I have a contract." My lack of fear confused him. He blinked, stepping back slightly, then surged forward again, slamming his hand against the wall next to my head. Thud. It was a classic intimidation move. "Screw your contract," he yelled. "You think you're better than me? You're just some paper pusher landlord. I could snap you in half." I didn't yell. I stood my ground, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. Then I spoke in a low, steady voice that cut through his shouting. "I am just enforcing the rules you agreed to, Brock. You signed the lease." Then, I decided to twist the knife just a little. I looked at him with a pitying smile. You never did like following rules, did you? Even back in school, you always thought you were above them. He froze. His eyes narrowed. What did you say? He whispered. He was trying to place me, trying to figure out how I knew about his past. But his anger was blinding him. He couldn't see the man in front of him. He only saw an obstacle he wanted to smash. He raised a fist, his face turning purple with rage. You think you're smart. I'll show you what happens when you mess with me. This was the fatal blunder. In his blind rage, Brock drew back his fist and punched the drywall right next to my face. His fist went through the plaster with a loud crunch. Dust filled the air. I'm going to wreck this place, he screamed, pulling his bleeding hand out of the wall. And then I'm going to come for you. I didn't run. I simply took a half step back and pointed a finger toward the ceiling corner behind him. That is unfortunate, I said quietly. Brock whipped his head around. There, blinking with a tiny red light, was a high-definition security camera. I had installed it last week, fully disclosed in the lease addendum he hadn't read. Section 22, Video Surveillance of Common Areas, I recited. And Section 19, Zero Tolerance for Violence, Threats, and Destruction of Property. I pulled out my phone. The feed was recording to the cloud in real time. I had him on video destroying my property and threatening my physical safety. The escalating reveal was complete. His face went pale. He looked from his bleeding hand to the camera, and then to me. He realized, finally, that he hadn't just punched a wall. He had punched his ticket out of here. I walked back to my office and locked the door. I didn't need to argue. I drafted the final document, an unconditional notice to quit. In our state, threatening a landlord and destroying property were grounds for immediate eviction. No second chances, no warnings. I attached the video file to the digital eviction filing and sent it to the courthouse and the local sheriff's department. The next morning, the notice was taped to his door. It wasn't a warning this time. It was an order. He had 3 days to vacate the premises. I heard him in the hallway, crying on the phone to someone, maybe his mom, maybe a lawyer who told him he had no case. He tried to come to my door to plead. He knocked softly this time, begging for another chance. I lost my job, man. I have nowhere to go. Please. I didn't answer. I sat at my desk, watching him on the monitor. It wasn't cruelty. It was consequences. He had spent his life bullying people without repercussions. He thought the world would always bend to his anger. He was learning, very painfully, that the world actually bends to those who are prepared. The law was on my side, and the clock was ticking. 3 days later, the sheriff arrived to oversee the eviction. It was a gray, drizzly Tuesday. Brock came out of the apartment carrying 2 garbage bags of clothes. He looked broken. His shoulders were slumped, his arrogance completely evaporated. He looked like a child. As the deputy escorted him toward the exit, Brock stopped in front of me. I was standing by the main door, holding the keys he had surrendered. He looked at me, his eyes red. Why? He asked, his voice shaking. Who even are you? I smiled, a genuine, calm smile. I'm Vincent Lane, I said. The kid you shoved in the locker in 10th grade. Good luck, Brock. Brock is left stunned on the curb. I closed my door, reclaiming my sanctuary. The justice is complete.
This story isn't just about a bad tenant or a landlord with a grudge. It is a powerful reminder that our actions have long-lasting echoes. Brock Halloway struggled because he believed that intimidation and loudness were the only ways to navigate the world. He judged Vincent based on his quiet demeanor, assuming weakness where there was actually calculated strength. He underestimated the boy he bullied, never realizing that the tables can always turn. The lesson: never mistake silence for weakness. Just because someone doesn't shout back doesn't mean they aren't fighting. True power often lies in preparation, knowledge, and emotional control, not in physical intimidation. Treat everyone with respect, because the person you torment today might hold the keys to your future tomorrow. Be kind, follow the rules, and remember, arrogance is a debt that eventually gets collected. Thank you so much for following Vincent's journey from the bullied student to the master of his own domain. It was an emotional ride of strategic justice, and we hope you felt every moment of his triumph. If you enjoyed this story and love hearing about underdogs who prove everyone wrong, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Tell us in the comments, do you think Vincent went too far with his strict rules? Or was it the perfect payback for a bully? Type Team Justice if you think you did the right thing by enforcing the law. See you in the next story.